It was a quiet afternoon at a local diner when an elderly black woman walked in, hoping to enjoy a peaceful meal. But what she didn't know was that her simple visit would reveal a shocking truth. As she sat down, the waitress, who was already having a rough day, ignored her completely. But when the woman's daughter walked in, everything changed. Who was she? And why did the waitress suddenly go pale? This wasn't just about a rude customer service experience. It was about justice, accountability, and the power of standing up for what's right. Stick around to see how this tense encounter turns into a moment of reckoning. Will the waitress face the consequences of her actions? The answer may surprise you. The elderly woman, named Mrs. Turner, had been coming to the diner for years. She was a quiet soul, always polite and soft-spoken, never causing trouble. But today, something felt different. The waitress, a young woman named Amy, had been distracted all morning, her patience wearing thin with every customer. When Mrs. Turner asked for a glass of water, Amy barely looked up, snapping at her in a way that left the other patrons uneasy. Mrs. Turner, as always, took it in stride, but you could tell she was hurt. It wasn't just the rude service, it was the coldness, the obvious disregard. The door jingled as Amy's gaze shifted to the entrance, and a look of shock crossed her face as a woman entered, her presence commanding the room. This wasn't just any woman. The woman who entered the diner was tall, confident, and unmistakably important. She walked toward the counter with purpose, her eyes briefly scanning the room before locking onto Amy. It was clear from the way Amy's face paled that she recognized her. But what was the connection? The woman was dressed in a sharp business suit, her posture immaculate, exuding authority. As she approached Mrs. Turner's table, Amy stiffened. Mrs. Turner looked up, her warm smile unshaken by the tension in the air. She seemed to recognize the woman, but not from the diner. The woman smiled back, but it wasn't just any smile. It was one of quiet understanding, as if they shared a bond far deeper than a casual acquaintance. The kind of bond that only comes with knowing someone's past, their secrets, their struggles. Amy hesitated, watching the interaction unfold with a mix of confusion and apprehension. She had no idea who this woman was, but something told her this was no ordinary customer. The silence between them seemed to stretch on, thick with unspoken words. The mystery deepened. Who was she really, and what was the connection to Mrs. Turner? And what did she want with Amy? The tension in the diner was palpable. The other customers were all eyeing the scene, wondering why Amy was so rattled. Mrs. Turner finally spoke, her voice calm and steady. "This is my daughter, Detective Alicia Turner. She's been working for the city for over 15 years. Amy's eyes widened. Detective. Alicia Turner. The name rang a bell, but she couldn't place it. But what she could feel was the sudden weight of the moment, the realization that whatever was about to unfold, it wouldn't be good for her. She braced herself. Alicia's presence in the diner sent a ripple of unease through the room. Amy's eyes flickered to the side, her hands trembling slightly as she wiped them on her apron. The weight of the moment was crushing, and yet she couldn't look away. There was something about Alicia that was different from the usual law enforcement types she'd seen around town, something that carried the sharp edge of experience, like someone who had seen the worst the world could offer. Alicia took a seat beside her mother, her eyes never leaving Amy, who stood frozen behind the counter. The silence stretched on, thick and suffocating, until finally Alicia spoke, her voice low but clear. "I need to know what happened here today. I need to understand why my mother was treated this way." Amy flinched, her face flushing with guilt and fear. She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. What could she possibly say? She had treated Mrs. Turner with disdain for no reason other than her own prejudice. The thought of what might happen next, the fallout, the consequences, was enough to make her stomach churn. As the seconds ticked by, the other patrons fell silent, watching with bated breath. Some knew about Alicia's reputation. She had solved cases that no one else could touch, brought justice to people others had forgotten. But none of them knew the full story of why she was here now. Alicia turned her gaze toward Amy, her expression hardening. "You've been working here long." Amy nodded, her throat dry. "Yeah, for about 2 years." "And in those 2 years, have you ever seen my mother before?" Alicia's voice remained calm, but it held a steel edge. Amy swallowed hard. She hesitated, her mind racing to figure out how much to say, or whether saying anything would make it worse. "Yeah, she comes in sometimes. She's always quiet, always polite. And yet today, you chose to treat her as if she were invisible." Alicia continued, her tone cutting through the air like a knife. Why was she not good enough to get the service she deserves? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Amy's heart hammered in her chest. She had been rude, yes, but she hadn't expected it to blow up like this. She hadn't expected this woman, this detective, to walk in and turn everything upside down. Across the diner, the murmurs began. People started to talk, some asking questions, others just watching in stunned silence. There was a growing sense that this was more than just a confrontation over poor service. Something deeper, something darker, was unfolding right before their eyes. Amy glanced at Mrs. Turner, who had remained unusually calm throughout the exchange, her hands folded neatly in her lap. There was a depth to her expression now, a quiet strength that made Amy's stomach twist. What was going on? What did she not know about this woman? What had she walked into? Alicia leaned forward slightly, her eyes never leaving Amy's. "I'm not here to make a scene. I'm here to make sure people like you are held accountable. Because there are too many people who think they can get away with treating others like this. And I won't stand for it." The diner fell into a tense stillness. The air felt thick with anticipation, the kind of stillness before a storm. Everyone was waiting for the inevitable, but no one knew what that would look like yet. Would Amy crack under the pressure? Would she be forced to face the consequences of her actions? Or would Alicia's presence be enough to shake things loose? And Amy's heart raced. What was he talking about? This wasn't just about the diner. It wasn't just about rude service. She was caught in the middle of something much darker, something involving people far more powerful than she could have imagined. Alicia's eyes darted from the man to her mother, then back again. "What do you mean, something she's been sitting on?" Her voice broke slightly, as if the weight of the moment was finally sinking in. Mrs. Turner sighed, her face a mask of calm resolve. "I didn't want you to know, Alicia. But the truth is, I've been protecting a dangerous secret. A secret that's tied to your father's past, to your childhood. And now it's all coming back to haunt us." Amy couldn't believe what she was hearing. Her mind spun with confusion. What kind of secret could a woman like Mrs. Turner be hiding? And why was this man so insistent on keeping it under wraps? The man's eyes flickered with impatience. "It's time, Alicia. We can't protect you anymore. Your father's connections run deep, and they're the reason your mother's life has been in danger. The very reason we've been keeping you safe all these years." Alicia's face drained of color, and for the first time, she seemed truly vulnerable. "You're telling me that all of this, the cases, the dangers, the threats, were because of Dad?" Her voice shook with disbelief. Mrs. Turner nodded, her eyes wet with unshed tears. "I thought I could keep you safe from it all. But your father's enemies are closing in. They know everything." Just as the weight of those words settled over them, Amy realized she had been standing in the middle of something far bigger than a mere misunderstanding. This wasn't just a confrontation over bad service. It was the unraveling of a web of lies, power, and betrayal. The man who had been silent until now finally spoke again. "I'm sorry, Alicia, but the truth is, it's not just your